So now that you know how a neuron fires, we need to spend some time talking about the chemicals that are released from the sending neuron to the receiving neuron. These are called neurotransmitters. These neurotransmitters cross the synaptic gap and bind to the receptor sites of the receiving neurons. When this happens, when that binding happens, those neurotransmitters are influencing that receiving neuron to generate an action potential and to fire again. So here you have a sending neuron. You've got little vesicles with circles in them. Those are the neurotransmitters. The neurotransmitters are being released from the sending neuron and they are binding to the receptor sites of the receiving neuron. Sometimes too many neurotransmitters are released. And if too many neurotransmitters are released, what happens is a process known as reuptake. This is when the extra neurotransmitters that are not binding to the receptor site of the receiving neuron are reabsorbed into the sending neuron. So let's go back to that video and you'll see both the binding process happen and the reabsorption. Okay, so here you've got the vesicles that are releasing the neurotransmitters. These are the little circles here. Some of them are binding to the receptor sites of the receiving neuron. Sometimes there's too many of them though, and they will be reabsorbed back into the sending neuron. Okay, so now you know what neurotransmitters are. Let's talk about 6 very important neurotransmitters. These are chemicals that are released in our brain and they have a huge impact on our behavior, which is what biological psychologists are interested in. The first neurotransmitter is acetylcholine. You will see this referred to as ACH. This is released at the neuromuscular joint, so we know that it's going to have an effect on our muscles. It's a motor neuron or neurotransmitter. It plays an important role in arousal and attention. When ACH is released, your muscles contract. And if for some reason ACH is blocked, if it can't get to the receiving neuron, your muscles do not contract at all. The loss of ACH producing cells is linked to Alzheimer's disease. So you can remember this, ACH begins with an A, it has an impact on Alzheimer's disease. So if you are losing too much of the neurotransmitter ACH, you could have your memory impacted and potentially develop Alzheimer's. If you have too much ACH, you're going to have muscle spasms. If you have too little ACH, you could potentially have muscle paralysis. And your book talks about blow darts that tribal individuals use that have poison in them that could potentially paralyze your muscles. The second neurotransmitter is dopamine. This affects neurons that are associated with voluntary movement and pleasure. It also plays a huge role in learning, memory, and emotions. If you have too little dopamine, it's going to attack your muscles and you could develop Parkinson's disease. Whereas too much dopamine, if you have an excessive amount of dopamine, you could potentially develop schizophrenia, which is an abnormal psychiatric disorder. It affects your emotions and your learning. It's really a break from reality. These people often have hallucinations and delusions. So if you have too much dopamine, you could potentially develop schizophrenia. Serotonin is a neurotransmitter that's found throughout the brain. It appears to set an emotional tone. It can affect your mood, how happy you feel. It could affect how hungry you are, how sleepy you're getting, and how aroused you can be or attentive. Low levels of serotonin are implicated in depression, and the drugs that are given to people who have been diagnosed with depression are called SSRIs, selective serotonin reuptake inhibitors. So going back to those neurotransmitters that are being released in the synaptic cleft, drugs that are given to depressed patients stop the reabsorption of serotonin so that more of the serotonin is released into the synaptic cleft so the receiving neuron can absorb that, and so that not a lot of it is reuptaked or reabsorbed. Endorphins are a neurotransmitter that help reduce pain by inhibiting or turning down neurons that transmit pain information. If you've ever been on a run or if you've ever done something that is physically labor intensive, you might have experienced a runner's high. I myself am a runner, and one of the things that I like about running is not just that it's good for me and it's exercise, but this feeling, this euphoric feeling I get after I go on a long run. If you've ever heard of people doing like superhuman feats, being able to lift a car off someone who's trapped or a tree, that's because they've had so much of the endorphins that are pumped out. It is the brain's kind of natural pain inhibitor that would happen. Norepinephrine helps control alertness and arousal. If you have too little norepinephrine, it can depress your mood. And remember, norepinephrine is something that is controlled not just by the nervous system, but it also is controlled by the endocrine system. Whereas GABA is an excitatory neurotransmitter that's involved in memory. An undersupply is linked to seizures, tremors, and insomnia. So you can see that it plays a role in not just our muscles and memory, but also in our ability to concentrate. So what you're going to be doing over the next 2 days in class is you are going to be writing skits for these 6 neurotransmitters, and the cast of your skit are the following characters: Acetylcholine, or ACH, norepinephrine, or norepinephrine, Donald dopamine, serotonin, Enrique endorphin, which is endorphins, and then GABA, which is GABA. Your task is to decide upon a scenario where these characters meet and they're playing out a role. One of the most popular things that students do in the past is have all of these individuals meet at like a blind date, or they meet for the first time in a group and they're interacting with one another. In your assigned groups, you will need to assign one neurotransmitter to each person. Each group should have 6 people for each of the neurotransmitters. Each person is responsible for doing the following: writing their puppet into the group script, decorating your puppet, and then performing their part of the puppet show for the rest of the class. Here's a picture of some neurotransmitter puppets in the years past, and if you look at the corkboard at the front of the classroom, you will see some neurotransmitter puppets from the years past. This is going to be graded as a mini project. What I'm going to be grading is your completed script with accurate information for neurotransmitters. So perhaps the person who's representing serotonin can have too little serotonin and is a depressed individual at this meetup. You are going to need to turn in 1 script per group, and I would recommend that you have a script writer writing down what each of the characters is saying and hand in a completed script, not 6 different dialogues from each of the individuals in your group. You're also going to be graded on the creativity of your script. I highly encourage you to make it funny, to make it just kind of outlandish and out there, as long as your information is correct. And then, of course, I'm going to be grading you on the design of your puppets. This is going to be your first mini project grade. You're going to have 2 days in class to work on it. If you have any questions, let me know. You will be getting a handout in class describing the information that I have just told you. I highly recommend going back over, making sure that you understand the function of each of the neurotransmitters. These are extremely important. They're very much tested on the AP exam, and you will be expected to know what happens when we have too much and too little of each of these. As always, guys, if you have questions, please email me.